Hello, you waiting for somebody else?
Hello, Mr. Black, how are you? Good to see you. Where are you going, please?
I'm going to the White City Suite.
Please, this way.
Hello, everyone. This is the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, and I can't remember a time in Israel's history when it was not under attack and in an emergency. In fact, the Jewish state has been in a perpetual emergency from the moment it was born. Now, for the first time, many prominent voices, including voices of hyperbolic exaggeration motivated by internal politics, are claiming Israel's existence is in fact being threatened. Its existence, is it? To get some real-time answers, we ask one of the most knowledgeable threat analysts that I know, that's Kenneth Abramowitz, author of the trend-setting Multifront War, now out in its third edition, updated just in time. Welcome, Ken. Let's talk about both internal threats and external ones. Let's start with the external threats, Ken. So, Ken, tell us, when you look at Iran, the possibility of a nuclear confrontation, when you look at the diplomatic isolation or relations with the United States and the Democratic Party, what do you think is the greatest external threat that Israel is facing?
Let me just say 30 seconds of philosophy. When countries have relations with other countries, you have three choices. You can be a friend, obviously. You can be an enemy, obviously. And you can be a frenemy. In other words, a half friend and a half enemy. Those terms I'll keep using. To answer your question, the number one threat facing Israel is that America is moving from friend to a frenemy. America's been a frenemy of Israel before. And also, there's different gradations of frenemies. But the biggest challenge Israel has and will have is America's moving to a frenemy and less of a friend and more of an enemy, and it has to manage that process.
When you say that America's moving toward being an enemy, what exactly do you mean, and who in America is actually manipulating or driving that situation?
The biggest challenge facing Israel is that America is moving from being a friend to a frenemy. In other words, unreliable friend. It could be a friend in the morning and an enemy in the afternoon. Now, this is related to our internal challenges in America between Democrats and Republicans. The Democrat Party has moved very far to the left and is really a socialist or a communist party, or has elements in it. And by the way, is increasingly anti-Semitic. I would argue systemically anti-Semitic. The Republican Party loves Israel. And as America splits apart, hopefully for not too much longer, but as America splits apart, then its relations with Israel split apart.
Now, let me just stop you on this one question. When you say that the Democrats have become anti-Semitic and a communist and socialist party, you don't mean the entire party. You mean a strong fraction, perhaps a controlling fraction of the party. Is that correct?
Well, yes, it's a fraction of the party, call it a minority, but the majority is not expelling them. I mean, think of it in terms of the Republican Party. What if a minority of the Republican Party was Nazis and the majority of the party says nothing about it or doesn't kick them out of the party? You would say,
that's right.
Then the majority is complicit with the minority.
That is right. The Democratic Party has tolerated this anti-Semitic minority within its midst. And if I could just say, I believe that this anti-Semitic minority is controlling the rest of the party due to its vituperance and its vibrance. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and the Democrat Party should have expelled the anti-Semites. By the way, the anti-Semites also hate Christians. So you could say the Democrat Party should expel them, but it's afraid that those rogue elements of the party, whether you call them socialists, communists, anti-Semites, or anti-Christians, they're afraid they'll set up a third party, so to speak, and dilute the strength of the Democrat Party. So they've made a moral, or you could say immoral, decision to allow the anti-Semites and the anti-Christian elements and the communists to stay within the party to strengthen the overall size of the party.
So what can be done about this threat?
There's things that can be done in my imagination, and there's things that can be done in reality. So since today we're focused on reality, the Republican Party has to behave much more aggressively. And I have an expression that the forces of evil slander good guys with lies. And the Republican Party has to slander, so to speak, the bad guys with the truth. So I never condone lying. And the American public is not being properly educated by the Republicans. And by the way, in Israel, the Likud is the equivalent of the Republican Party. They're not doing a sufficiently good job educating the people as to the big issues and the big threats.
Now, let's talk about some more of these external threats. Where do you think we're sitting right now with Iran and its nuclear threat?
Iran is obviously an existential threat to Israel. They promised to kill everyone in Israel, death to Israel. By the way, Americans forget this, but Iran's also promised to kill everyone in America, death to America. So Iran is the number one existential threat facing both Israel and America. The difference is that Israel knows that and America does not know that.
Do you think that Israel will attack Iran preemptively to destroy its nuclear capability?
Nowadays, with modern techniques, there's a number of ways to fight Iran, only one of which is what we call kinetic warfare, actually blowing something up, either with airplanes or with drones. That's one option. But nowadays, with the capabilities of cyber, no one's disclosed this to me, but I'll guess that Israel has the ability to close down Iran as a society.
Well, I think that Israel has been already engaged in a many-year stealth war of cyber and sabotage, but I am talking about the kinetic side. Do you think we're looking at a kinetic interaction with Israel and Iran, as I personally believe is coming?
Well, on the kinetic side, like everything in life, there's gradations. So there's little kinetic attacks, so to speak. In other words, a drone blows up a factory in Iran. I expect that to continue nonstop. And that's not considered war. When you open up the newspaper or the internet, people just consider that like an attack, a little attack. And then, of course, you can do 50 of them. And then, of course, you can do 500 of them. I would look for a combination of smaller kinetic attacks combined with larger cyber attacks to destabilize Iranian nuclear program. The reason Israel has a challenge with a direct frontal major attack on Iran nuclear sites is it needs America's either acquiescence or help, because after such an attack, Israel, of course, would be attacked by all of Iran's proxies. And when Israel has to fight a multi-front war, kinetic war, it's just a question of time till it'll run out of bombs, spare parts, and then it would have to go back to America. So if you have a hostile American administration and Israel were to attack Iran, it cannot rely on the United States because the United States is a frenemy, as we just discussed, not a friend. So as a frenemy, you're not sure whether America will resupply you or not. And that's why I only look for a modest kinetic attack, but combined with a vigorous cyber attack.
You know, it's interesting you should say that, because right now we have depleted our own stockpiles. Not only the stockpiles that we have in the United States as a result of the Ukraine engagement, but also the Negev stockpile has been depleted terribly, because when we ran out of 155 shells and other types of military hardware, we started to deplete the Negev stockpile. So that is also dwindling down. Is that part of your thinking, that America may simply not have the ability to resupply Israel at this time?
Yes. By the way, it can be either or. America can say, or pretend that we want to supply you, but we simply don't have the weapons. Or it could say, we have the weapons And only under blackmail conditions, like Israel withdraw from Judea and Samaria, will we actually supply them to. In either case, America cannot be relied on. And this is a separate issue, but America and its allies must undergo a massive rearmament immediately. I wouldn't wait one day if I had the power. Immediately, massive construction of new plants, new factory lines.
But we're talking about
fill this void of weapons.
Military planners are talking about years to resupply the depletion of our stockpiles. That this is not a matter of weeks or months, but years. What's the chance that if America fails Israel, that China will step in?
Well, basically, that's what's happening right now. As America fades, I would argue purposely fades, because I think the Democrat Party is complicit with China. But as America fades, then China rises, so to speak. So that's the trend right today. If Trump becomes president again, he can arrest that, convince the Chinese that they're not going to take over the world. But right now, the Chinese have publicly said, we have a better model than America. And what they're in effect saying is, the world's coming to us, not because we're invading everybody and fighting everybody, but with our money and our loans, a Belt and Road Initiative, the world's coming to us. So the Chinese think they're going to take over the world. And we have to convince them that the world's big enough for America and China and another 200 countries. And we do not have to all take over each other. We just have to learn how to work with each other and only very occasionally fight each other, but more learn how to work with each other without killing each other. That we do not want the world to be a dysfunctional mess of a lot of dead people. And we just plain have to stay strong. And the stronger America stays, the less the chances of war. As you know, when you're big and strong, people don't want to fight wars with you. So that's why America has to stay very strong to avert the chances of war. A weak America actually increases the chances of war.
Let's talk about internal threats. Do you believe that Israel is being torn apart for real by this democracy fight? My democracy is better than your democracy. Is it justified? Will it resolve itself? Is it endangering the states? What's your thought?
Both Israel and America are fighting many civil wars right now. Fortunately, we're not killing each other, and I do not expect us to kill each other for obvious reasons. And the difference between left and right, or some people say right and wrong, or between free markets and capitalism versus socialism and communism, these differences, which in the past have been minor, both in Israel and America, are now exaggerated. I think our foreign enemies are complicit in getting us to fight each other. And I can see fingerprints of bad guys, in particular Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, financed by Qatar, China, Russia, World Economic Forum. I think these foreign enemies are purposely interfering in the democracy of Israel and America and causing our mini civil war or mini disagreements to become exaggerated.
So how does Israel get itself out of this internal mess the Jewish people have been fighting since they divided over the Golden Calf? And the history of Israel is always one of division, but yet we have somehow survived. What does Israel do at this moment to conquer its own divisiveness?
Yes. Well, there's certain people that you can compromise with and certain people, well, obviously, that you cannot compromise with. So I would say that, and the opposition in Israel is approximately half and half of people who are actually logical, reasonable, rational, and want to seek a compromise for everyone's benefit. And half of the opposition is seeking regime change in Israel and is just using the Supreme Court issue as an excuse to slander with false narratives the Netanyahu coalition government and cause it to fall so they can come and take over. So they're actually seeking a coup, I would say, or a regime change. And those people cannot be compromised with. And so the government has to find the rational side of the opposition and be compromised with them. If that's not possible, then the coalition government just simply has to run the country. That's all. The way the law allows it to run the country, and they have to pass the legislation that they have to pass in the Knesset and let the opposition just cry and complain.
You've spoken of these external threats. What about diplomatic isolation? What about the BDS? What about the International Criminal Court? Let's take BDS first. How do you think that Israel overcomes the growing BDS, especially since BDS is now being adopted by the younger generation on the college campuses?
Israel's being isolated because people call it evil. Actually, the reality is the other way around. Israel is good, and the forces of evil are criticizing Israel for being good, but they slander Israel and accuse it of doing things that it's not doing. So this is typical technique of enemies. I call this cultural warfare. There's no bombs blowing up. It's just a slander of the good guys. And as I had mentioned, when the bad guys slander the good guys with lies, the good guys have to slander the bad guys with the truth. So Israel has to better state its case for truth and also has to expose the enemies of Israel for their lies.
Do you think that Israel can succeed in this endeavor the way that BDS is growing today and Israel's current ability right now, today, its current ability to fight back against the falsity? Can Israel fight back effectively and make a difference?
Now, bear in mind that in the world there's roughly 8 billion people. In Israel, there's roughly 10 million people. So the question is, can 10 million people influence 8 billion people? Well, they need help, obviously. The difference, by the way, is Israel's 80% Jewish. So if it's 9 million people overall, it's about 7 million Jews, but it doesn't change the point. Whether it's the 7 million or the 9 million, it's a small voice out of 8 billion people. So Israel has to raise its voice first. And secondly, it has to unify its voice. And thirdly, it needs help. And traditionally, Israel has received help from America. So it was a combination of America plus Israel's voice. But now that America is confused as to its voice, and half of the country will love Israel. I would say 75% of the people love Israel, but that 25% is infecting American society and American politics and causing Israel and America to drift apart from each other, I would say unnecessarily.
So this harkens back to the chief external threat that you mentioned, which is the erosion of American support as a result of the elements of the Democratic Party, correct?
Yes, because the enemies of America, and in particular Iran and Qatar, and as well as the global organizations, the UN, the World Economic Forum, as these foreign enemies have infected America, so to speak, it's moving America away from Israel, but not because Israel's bad, it's because America's become bad, so to speak. Israel directly represents America's self-interest in the Middle East and should get 100% support in a normal world from America because people call Israel the largest aircraft carrier in the Navy. And when you have a wonderful aircraft carrier, you support that aircraft carrier. And the elements of the Democrat Party are actually working for our enemies. And that's why they're fighting Israel, not because Israel's evil, it's because Israel's good and they're evil.
And how does Israel fight for its continuing existence in other parts of the world, especially Europe, where there's a great deal of Jew hatred? And also, let's address the International Criminal Court. We'll start with Europe first. What does Israel do to increase its standing in Europe?
Europe has a couple of problems. One is Europe is 90% Christians, and many of the Christians are irrationally anti-Semitic. Well, anti-Semitism is the foundation of Christianity. How can you be a good Christian and be anti-Semitic? It's like saying, I live on the 5th floor of a building, I love my building, I just hate the foundation. It's ridiculous. So Europe is irrationally anti-Semitic. and has irrationally allowed about 10% of the population to become Muslim through illegal immigration. And so that 10% is influencing the natural tendencies of the Christians to be anti-Semitic Christians with, by definition, anti-Semitic Muslims, and you get a bad combination and enemies to Israel.
What does Israel do with the governments of Europe to maintain itself?
Israel has to have a much higher quality caliber of ambassadors and better educate the governments of Europe as to what Israel can do to help those governments. We're seeing it now. The governments of Europe are calling Israel for weapons because they're afraid of Russia, and they have to rearm themselves after they irrationally disarmed, so to speak, since the Cold War. Israel also has to educate the universities, has to educate the normal people. It's a full-scale PR campaign based on truth to counteract the slander, and costs a lot of money, and you need a lot of very talented people to do it, and Israel hasn't done it. So therefore, relations with Europe, I'd say in general, are, I'd say, neutral. I mean, there's elements of deterioration and elements of improvement. Israel has to state its case better. Now, bear in mind, when you're so small and outside other countries are so big, you have to talk in a louder voice. You have to yell, so to speak. Well, the equivalent of yelling is to have a coordinated policy, coordinated public relations campaign, and have many Israeli representatives speaking on the same message. Now, the trouble is, Jews being Jews, whatever message you have, there's someone who disagrees with the message. So the prime minister has to do a better job corralling the cats, so to speak, and creating a message. So I'll give you an example. The Palestinian state is an existential threat to Israel. Explain it. It's also an existential threat to the Arabs. Explain it. Because the Palestinian state, like Gaza, would be taken over by terror criminal organizations. Why is that good for Arabs? Why is that good for Muslims? Say that Israel's acting not only in the interests of the Jews, but also in the interests of the Christians and the Muslims who live within Israel. Say it. And relative to Iran, Iran's an existential threat to the world. They promised to kill everyone in America, everyone in Israel, and they promised to take over the world. And they promised to be involved in moving their Shiite population around the world and using that as a mechanism to eventually take over the world. Say it. Americans do not know that Iran's an existential threat to America. Everyone thinks it's an existential threat to Israel, and who cares? Israel's full of Jews. Well, America's full of Christians, and it's just the same existential threat. Say it. So Israel just has to speak with a much louder and clearer voice.
But, all right, so you're telling us what Israel should do. My question is, will Israel do this? Will Israel take the steps it must take in the extremely near future to counter these threats?
Well, Israel has the best government it's ever had, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, which is the best prime minister for today. But that does not mean he's perfect. And so he needs a little, I was going to say kick, I don't mean that in a physical sense, a push, a prod to step up his game, so to speak. And one of the challenges of being a prime minister of Israel or any country, there's 100 different issues that you have to address. It's very difficult to manage 100 issues simultaneously. So what he needs, I would say, two very strong people under him. I call him Mr. Tough Guy and Mr. Nice Guy. But in any case, two upper-level managers to help. He has Ron Dermer, who's great. He needs to clone or find another Ron Dermer so the number 2 and number 3 can manage this process. It's beyond the ability of a CEO to manage complexity of this level.
And what does Israel do about the International Criminal Court, which I should say is not a real criminal court, it's just an artificial court which was created in recent years, and most of the world does not recognize it, and its jurisdiction is limited to those who do recognize it, but somehow the system has been finagled to have Israel come under its jurisdiction. What does Israel do about the ICC?
Well, Israel needs help when dealing with international organizations or multinational organizations, which I think should by and large all be closed. I think countries are sovereign and countries should make decisions for themselves. I do not think we need an international infrastructure of either good guys or bad guys or do-gooders or bad doers overlooking sovereign individual countries. But we have an international criminal court. We have the United Nations. We have a World Economic Forum. We have a World Health Organization. Here, Israel needs help, and in particular, America, because America finances roughly 25% of international organizations, except International Criminal Court. So you need America's money or withdrawal of money and America's prestige to basically say that the International Criminal Court are criminals, and we have nothing to do with it in any way possible. So in that example, Israel needs America help and support to counteract these multinational organizations, which by and large are run by the bad guys. So whether the bad guys are Iran or Qatar, or the bad guys are China or Russia, Israel's basically fighting the world, and it cannot fight the world by itself. It needs American help. That's why America has to get its act together to play a traditional role of being good, while America is actually gravitating to becoming a force of evil in the world. And that's our American problem. Israel has to fix its Israel problems.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because the previous administration, the Trump administration, actually implemented your thought process there. They sanctioned the International Criminal Court. They withdrew the funding from UNRWA and from the Palestinian Authority, and now it's all been restored. So basically, America was fighting back against this bad game, and now America is actually working to reinstate these bad forces, correct?
That's right. It's a very sad situation. Many of these organizations are run by, I would say, criminals, paid for by our enemies. And they should be, the International Criminal Court should be sanctioned by the U.S. Everyone connected to it should have their banking relationships frozen. And let's see how much fun it is to work as a judge for free in a court with no money, and all of it sanctioned by the U.S. as a criminal organization, or as I would call it cultural terror organization, but you can call it a criminal organization. But you need America on your side. Little Israel can't criminalize the International Criminal Court. Only someone big and strong like America.
All right. Here's a concluding question for you. Is it too late to fix the problems in America that seem to be weaving themselves in and out of every pitfall and threat that Israel is encountering? Is it too late to stop that or to change that now?
Well, it's too late with the current management, but not if you fix management. So I'll give you an example. Former Mayor Rudy Giuliani said a couple of years ago, if I were in charge of New York City again, for 2 months, I can fix it. And President Trump publicly said that I can fix America in 6 months. And Governor Ron DeSantis publicly said, with 4 + 4 years as president, I can fix the problems. To which Trump said what I just said, you don't need 8 years, you don't need 4 years, make me president in 6 months, I'll fix this mess. So I would say under the proper management, aided by the proper top management. This is not a one-person job. It's not Trump fixing America. It's not Netanyahu fixing. It's like a team sport, like a baseball game. The pitcher may get credit for winning the game, but there were 8 people helping him. So both Netanyahu and Trump need much stronger people around them. And then as a team, they can fix the mess in a very short period of time.
All right. And you have manifested your thought processes about these threats in the 3rd edition of the Multifront War. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. And I grouped together the enemies to make it simple with a color code, which I call the reds, the greens, and the blues. The reds being traditional color for communists, greens being traditional color for Islam, and in particular Islamists, and blue being the traditional color for the United Nations, which I use as a proxy for all global organizations. And so the book examines Why the Reds and the Greens and Blues that decided
To attack
the good people, the people who believe in the rule of law? And how can the people who believe in the rule of law, in other words, properly functioning democracies, fight, protect itself against the forces of evil, which I summarize as the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues?
Thank you, Ken Abramowitz.
pleasure to be with you always.
This is Edwin Black, and we'll see you next time.